There's been a lingering question circulating around in my head right off the cusp of the Devil May Cry 5 announcement. Now, I'm positive you've already seen the title of the video, which probably should be met with an auditorium full of boos, maybe throwing whiskey and tomatoes at me, and culminating my bad night by getting laughed out of a bar in Tokyo. Believe me guys, I think the Devil May Cry Reboot is a game that should get all the hate it receives. The game developers did nothing but constantly piss in the face of the Devil May Cry audience. Even being associated with Devil May Cry in name, that Reboot had a high bar of expectations that it could not exceed. I thought it was just an average experience at best, which I've gone over many times on this channel. Check out the links in the description below if you don't believe me. That being said, however, is there things that Devil May Cry 5 could learn in general from the reboot? We know the reboot did a lot wrong, but objectively speaking, the original series could take some key elements and put them to good use. Let's do something different and go over why I feel that way with a brief segment that will discuss the future of DMC and the path that can be taken after Devil May Cry 5. First and foremost, I don't know about you guys, but when I played the original Devil May Cry games, I always found platforming to be not that spectacular.
You son of a bitch! Screw you!
When you're trying to spend almost 20 minutes trying to grab either a blue orb or a yellow orb in a tricky position, that amounts to a lot of tedium with wrestling the camera. You're better off just fighting Brock Lesnar while handcuffed if that's the case when things don't work in your favor. The Devil May Cry Reboot had simplistic platforming. It certainly wasn't spectacular, but it wasn't bad either. However, I feel like the level design and platforming supplemented that reboot rather well when it wasn't a buggy mess some of the time. Logically speaking, if Devil May Cry 5 has platforming segments, then it shouldn't be an MMA brawl just to adjust the camera correctly from point to point. So Devil May Cry 5 could learn from this and the game could have simpler platforming elements. It was said somewhere on some forum that DMC5 was going to have a lot more environmental scope compared to DMC4. So if that's true, we don't know yet, that's a rumor, but if that's true, then that means that DMC5 has nothing to worry about when it comes to sheer exploration. That's one thing I think the reboot was really good at, was the background environments. Some of them looked really nice, but the nightclub thing kinda hurt my eyes a fucking lot. But let's move on to the next thing. The next thing that DMC5 could use that the reboot implemented is an obvious training mode. Now listen, let's be honest. With 3 characters confirmed, that means there's going to be a plethora of movesets, skills, and techniques that will require setup here. I'm aware that you can just simply buy the PC version of DMC and put on debug mode in Bloody Palace and train there. However, that leaves the console guys in the dust, reminiscent to the fucking ending of Infinity War. I think it goes without saying that it's time for the original series to adopt a proper training mode, set up a good chunk of normal enemies, put them in waves, and have the player tinker around a bit. Let there be options and let us be able to play around with the new moves that we bought on Training Dummies. The last thing to cover here about what DMC5 could take from the reboot is all the numerous modes that the reboot created to fit in with the new difficulty settings for veteran players. I've seen true style players, I've seen Donguri videos, I've seen it all. Those pro players, they up the ante each time when it comes to the game challenging them, and this should be no different. The reboot had cool difficulty ideas in the definitive edition, like must stop, while where you can only damage your opponent with a S rank. We had shit like hardcore mode where you can stack up challenging difficulty on top of previous difficulties you unlocked in the game. And then there's like stuff like Gods Must Die, which is not exclusive to the reboot, but it is a mode where the AI can slap your titties around into oblivion by being harder than Dante Must Die. This is an adrenaline rush for pro DMC players, so it'd be a shame if some of these ideas were left on the cutting room floor with DMC5. However, as for everything else, I do agree that the reboot took a lot away from the series. It took a lot of the series' charm and it put it on the table and smashed it with a hammer. That's why that reboot is so regressive in regards to what the fan base thinks about it. That was the main problem behind it, and I do agree that there are problems with that game and stuff from that game I would not like to see back, like them butchering Devil Trigger, making it where the enemies float in air and you have to fucking go and catch them. That stuff is stupid and I don't like that, but there are good ideas that they can take from that reboot and put them in a future DMC installment, maybe DMC5 or maybe the next thing that we will talk about. Well, it looks like all those weird wish list requirements from the reboot is finally done. Another idea I thought about is the implementation of co-op arena for Devil May Cry 5. Remember the whole idea with Insuno saying that he put in a second controller input with Dante when he had doppelganger style equipped, so the secondary player can play with Dante's shadow? I think they could extend the longevity and replay value of DMC5 by taking inspiration from Ninja Gaiden Sigma with team missions. Hear me out. Team missions is a mode where you can team up with a buddy and take out certain hordes of enemies, and then there's like a final boss encounter where it's up to both players to take that boss out. I think that would be an interesting notion. The more I think about it, the more I get so excited that there actually could be co-op in a Devil May Cry game if implemented properly, because the problem with team missions is that it lags quite a lot online. So hopefully if they do implement this, then DMC5 would be absolutely perfect in those regards. There's no doubt that Capcom probably would milk the ever-living fuck out of that, but I would be all down for a co-op variant of Bloody Palace, for example. As for the future of Devil May Cry, I think it's only natural for Insuno to finally correct the mistake that was done with Devil May Cry 2's development. Finally undo this timeline mess and do us a service by remaking Devil May Cry 2, a full-fledged remake without any strict developer time or bullshit coordinated by Capcom or anyone else. If the rumors are true that Devil May Cry 2 was created in 4 months, then that game barely had time to manifest itself in the womb under Insuno's leadership. While Devil May Cry 3 was basically Capcom's big apology game, we've been dealing with the shuffling of Devil May Cry 2 at the end of the timeline for years now. It's like Capcom's worst joke, given the fact that they don't want to reference this game. All this timeline bullshit reminds me of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, where that game is so far into the future that all Capcom does now is they make prequels to Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. It's something I'm tired of. From a storyline perspective, I wish they would move on already from DMC2 and start putting out true sequels. Hopefully DMC5 does this, but something tells me that I highly doubt it. Of course, they didn't talk about it yet if the timeline takes place after DMC2, but again, the whole prequel thing, sometimes it sets up the notion that certain characters are going to survive if the game is a prequel. I think now is the time to correct your mistake. Give Insuno the time to remake Devil May Cry 2. I know you can do it. That would be a great idea. I believe if Resident Evil could do full-fledged remakes, then why can't this happen for Devil May Cry 2? One thing about Resident Evil Remake 1 one was it did expand on the events that happened in subsequent games and some prior games, so it had a lot of setup in the timeline when it came to building up the things that were going to happen in Resident Evil Code Veronica X and stuff like that. So why can't Devil May Cry 2, a full-fledged remake, do the same thing? Set up all the precursor elements, give Insuno his time, and if you want to hear more of our thoughts on what will happen with a Devil May Cry 2 remake, then I encourage you to look in the description below and check out our episodic discussion of Devil May Cry 2 and what we want for a remake of that game as a hypothetical podcast. Again, we had a good discussion. It was our first episodic discussion, I believe, so it's kind of rough around the edges. I'm not sure which one was first, Onimusha or Devil May Cry, but either way, I know that was the early period of the Infinite Ammo Syndicate, so be easy on us. I think you guys will enjoy that. Once again, this is Renegade Operative signing off. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my opinion piece on what I think Devil May Cry 5 could borrow from the reboot and other things in the future that could happen for the Devil May Cry series. Again, like, subscribe, comment, tell me your thoughts, and I will see you guys next time. Later.